Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of Moments in Time World War II edition podcast and our 11th episode into the campaign in Norway and Narvik. But before we head to the north, I kind of have to do a bit of an update of what's going on in France because it's going to have a major impact on things that happen in this episode. So, by this day in 1940, the Dutch have been neutralised. Belgium is pretty much on the ropes. The Germans have complete control of the air, and they're forcing the Allies back despite attempts to form defensive lines. The RAF in France is now heavily limited, and they're relying on aircraft flying in from England to attack the Germans in the flanks. However, by the time bomber command is arriving, their information is already sort of day out of date, so they're not always hitting their targets and also being bounced by German fighter aircraft. So it's not working very well. Unfortunately for them as well, Winston Churchill is now Prime Minister, and he's trying to organise a move by the British Expeditionary Force to head south to link up with the French at Amiens. This is considered to be exceptionally dangerous, and the British commanders in the field in France believe that London and Churchill have absolutely zero idea of what's actually going on in France. I mean, if anyone's seen the film Darkest Hour, it's kind of demonstrated in that by saying when Churchill's ranting about how they're just flags on a map and that the Panzers aren't a proper invasion, and it does sort of come across like that when you read his edict. By the 19th of May, it's pretty much been decided by everyone in the know that the only option really open to the British Expeditionary Force in France is that they're going to have to evacuate. Most importantly, on the 19th of May, we've talked about the Guards being the best regiments in the British Army. This is nonsense. The best regiments in the British Army are the East Kent Regiment and the Royal West Kent Regiment, of which one battalion of the East Kents, two battalions of the West Kents move up to Doullens on the 19th of May to halt the German advance. By mid-morning, the Germans have arrived. By early afternoon, all three battalions are either running or been captured. So on this date, the Battle of France is already over. But anyway, back to the north and Narvik.
Yes. So, despite the capture of Brevgivik, the situation is still crucial in the far north. You're looking at Auchinleck would be consulting with Generals Ruge and Flescher of the Norwegian army and would send a report back to the UK. And it would be that the damage caused by the Germans and the Royal Navy bombardments to Narvik specifically would mean that any transfer of ore from there would be delayed for many months. However, they would not be able to affect the ore going through the Baltic. Now, the expeditionary force was now invested in holding Narvik as a seat of Norwegian resistance and their government. Bodo, Harstad, and Skanland must be held, with Bodo being the most important, particularly since it stops the Germans from pushing up from Trondheim. Now, the key to this is that should Bodo fall, the Luftwaffe would take the airfield, which is still not 100% ready for the RAF, and it would make the entire Narvik area essentially untenable because it would be under a cloud of German aircraft. Now, he would also suggest that he would need 17 battalions, artillery, engineers, armored troops. He would need 104 3.7 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, 96 Bofors guns, 2 Hurricane squadrons, and the Blenheim squadron that he had been originally told about. Fortunately for him, the British government, they could not spare more than the independent companies and about 12 battalions. Also, only 100 anti-aircraft guns of differing calibers, and 2 squadrons of Hurricanes, and 1 of Gladiator biplanes. Now, Auchinleck agreed the amount of soldiers was enough, but the lack of aircraft and anti-aircraft guns would be problematic, and he would need bombers. If the Luftwaffe were to attack in force, he would not be able to hold and defend his force adequately, which would lead to the collapse of the entire campaign. Now, the chiefs of staff would write that furthermore, the expedition to Norway was absorbing forces that would be better employed elsewhere. Not the greatest statement to be making if you're looking to hold the area. Now, the chiefs of staff would recommend that all forces should be withdrawn following the neutralization of the Narvik port area, thereby stopping the Germans from using it before redeploying the Allied troops to France and or possibly to Great Britain as well. Now, this decision would be made on the 21st of May. 263 Squadron's Gladiators also arrived on the 21st of May at Bardavas, which was now ready for air operations and in a really good condition. It had 18 dispersal bays, 2 runways, taxiing lanes, it had underground operations rooms, and barracks for the men, though not quite for everyone, and it was extremely basic to begin with. Now, air observer posts were set up to report on Luftwaffe movements and feed back information to the fighters. However, the British setting up their own was in spite of there being a perfectly adequate Norwegian one, which was just needed some extra equipment. Although the British equipment was not really suitable, and it was weak sending messages over the iron-filled mountains. Go figure. Now, keeping in that idea, the Gladiators took off from an aircraft carrier in thick and foul weather. Running theme that we've had throughout this entire podcast has been not so great of weather. And unfortunately, due to that weather, 2 aircraft would be lost as they would crash with the mountainside. So that's what's happening up in the north. Alina, I have a question.
You may ask your question.
What is going on with the Poles?
Oh, that's so nice of you to ask what's happening with the Poles, because, of course, the original plan for all of this was for the Norwegians to march into Narvik. But even though they're making gains in the north and pushing the Germans back towards their supply base, at Bjornfjell, time is more or less of the essence at this point, and the other allies would also have to move. The Arkens Peninsula is a really difficult area to fight in, and it's basically bordered by the Bays Ford and the Skjominnes Ford. And the terrain is a plateau which is cut by mountains that range, from up to 700 metres, and ravines and bays with rocks that are strewn across the ground, pine trees and Arctic birches. So not only are they trying to fight the weather, they are now going to have to tackle really, really, really difficult terrain. And if that's not enough, the Germans had also fortified 2 settlements with direct communication with Narvik to basically call for assistance or artillery or aircraft. So, again, not only weather, not only the land, but also, the Germans have more or less barricaded and fortified themselves. So it's becoming quite a difficult situation to navigate. The Bays Ford was kept sheltered by this peninsula as it allowed the German seaplanes basically somewhere safe to land from the Royal Navy. So on the 15th of May, the Polish 2nd Battalion were relieved by the 14th Alpine Rifle Battalion and moved to Breivik and moved to boats with the 1st Battalion for the Arkens Peninsula. There is, well, I'm going to laugh away at this because this is not the only situation that we come across, but there's another language cock-up with the officer in charge of the boats who believed that they were supposed to be going to the Arkens town, not the peninsula base. So they set out in the wrong direction and straight into the line of sight into a German heavy machine gun and artillery positions. And this almost leads to disaster. But thankfully, the mistake was realised well before the Germans could gain range on them. They were instead landed at Skjomnes and marched on to Harvik, relieving the South Wales Guards for tea and raisins and a warning. Quote, "They are somewhere there. Don't go there. The Germans are good shooters." I mean, they've had more practice pretty much than the Allies at this stage, but hey. With supplies from both the French and the British, sorry, Zane, you may leave that in there because I've done it on purpose, because the Poles consider the British food to be better than the French, because the French canned food is nicknamed monkey meat, so malpe mienso, basically, as well as a French battery of 75mm artillery, but no service platoon. So yeah, this is not a great situation for the Poles, but what can you do really? You've got to eat, so you're going to eat anything really at this stage. The Poles are also short a lot of supplies, including spare belts for the heavy machine guns, ammunition, motorised vehicles, harnesses, and they have no fuses for the 81mm mortars. Lieutenant Shashkevich has, well, little or no information. He was sent to recon the hills and to look for more or less where the German front line is. So the lieutenant then charges forward and he takes the hill that would be named after him, and then carried on forward where, well, him and his soldiers were caught in a German ambush and bombarded with mortar fire. The Poles sought cover, awaited night cover to withdraw, but they remained trapped overnight, and they kept warm with lots of rum, of which the Poles are not a big fan. They needed vodka, so I don't know why they were given rum, but we're in this situation. The Germans are running short of ammunition, and believing they were against the French, they tried to sneak up on the Polish and force them to withdraw. The Poles, of course, fought really hard. They called heavy fire on the attackers and forced the Germans to withdraw. However, Lieutenant Shashkevich is still cut off, and the 3rd Platoon try and rescue him. They come under heavy fire, and they're kind of stuck where they are. This attempt kind of fails. A company-sized charge did push the Germans back a bit, but the Poles still could not get to our lovely lieutenant. The Polish command knew that taking this hill would not help win the campaign and ordered a heavy artillery bombardment to act as cover for the lost platoon to withdraw, and they trusted that their officer would understand what was going on. However, the British artillery officer didn't speak French or Polish. So this is a very dire situation to be, so an interpreter had to be found. The British also used map coordinates for plotting the artillery and not observation, and the maps they had were so out of date they would probably hit the Polish forces. Instead, a smokescreen was laid, the Poles escaped under cover, leaving only 4 fallen soldiers, which in itself is beyond... It's actually impossible, but they did it anyway. But this time round, I have not been given naval history. Thank you very much, Chris. And instead, Chris is going to do the next stage, our final stage, to talk a little bit about what's happening naval-wise.
Yes. We're also going to. The word cock up got mentioned in the notes quite a bit, but and it comes up again. But with as we've heard in previous episodes, the German force are pressing up from Trondheim, and it is a big problem. They're trying to hold them as much as possible at Bodo, and Auchinleck has said that this is a must hold position because they can, if they're going to conquer Dietl and take Narvik, they need to keep off the main German thrust for as long as possible at these choke points. So the Welsh, Scots, and Irish Guards have been relieved by the Poles and the French, and they're going by convoy down to Bodo with some of their heavy equipment. And one of the cruisers involved is HMS Effingham. They've come up, the convoy goes out, and they're trying to avoid Luftwaffe attack, so they go the long way in the hope that they won't pick up a German recon aircraft and then draw in the bombers. However, as they get close to Bodo, there is a main channel into the port, and they're concerned that there might be a U-boat present in this channel, which could see them getting torpedoed and nowhere to run. Well, the captain of the Effingham has a better chart than the commander of the convoy, and says, "I'm pretty sure if we take a shortcut up this channel, it will be perfectly safe." Well, when they go to do that, he manages to ram his relatively new cruiser onto an underwater shoal, which rips a huge hole in the bottom of the ship. They're forced to ground it on a nearby island and evacuate most of the men aboard the destroyer HMS Echo. However, they do lose a large chunk of the heavy equipment and all the mortar shells, which is a big problem. And then the Effingham has to be destroyed to stop the Germans from getting hold of it. So near enough brand new. I think it was built in 1938. Heavy cruiser lost because someone read the map wrong. Meanwhile, at Bodo, on the 17th of May, the Germans have attempted to repair a bridge over a river. They come under fire from the Scots Guards. So the Germans do what they normally do, or they have done, as we've seen in previous battles. They try to infiltrate the British positions along the river valley and then kind of force the Scots slowly back. By 2 a.m. the following day, the Scots' position is untenable, and Brigadier Fraser, who's in charge of them, is deemed to be unfit to continue commanding them, and Gubbins has to come and take over his position. They then decide that this whole area can't be held, and they have to fall back to Mo, blowing up all the road bridges as they go, except for the Mo Ayarana bridge, which falls into German hands. On the 21st of May, the Germans begin attacking the Guards' position 32 miles north of Mo at Messingslaten Bridge. Now, as I said, Auchinleck has described that this position is essential, must be held, and it is essential to stand and fight. But as the Germans do exactly the same thing again, they bring down heavy fire, the Luftwaffe, and they hit the British flanks, turning the British centre. And again, the Guards are forced to withdraw, again, demolishing bridges and forming up another defensive line. But it's starting to look like the inevitable is happening, and the Germans are going to punch through here. Whether they hold on at Narvik for the relief column, we have to find out in one of our later episodes. So do come and join us for that. We again, thanks for joining us in our campaign through Narvik in the north. Any likes or comments are always greatly received on whichever platform you're listening to. And please do head over to our Patreon, where there will be extra features, including an episode of much like Match of the Day, where they sit down and take the best games of the day apart. We'll be taking apart the strategic situation today in our bonus episode. So do head over to that. And thanks very much for joining us.